Okay, so let's talk about Vincent Chin Gigante for a second. So he was the boss of the Genovese crime family from 1981 to 2005. So he had quite a run. He started out as a mafia enforcer in the Luciano crime family, which became the Genovese family afterwards. And at one point, I guess he was the shooter when they tried to kill Luciano boss Frank Costello.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, on West 72nd Street, right off Central Park. And, big fancy building. Walked up to him, shot him in the head, skimmed his head. What do you say? That's for you, Frank?
Yep.
Yeah.
This one's for you, Frank.
And Costello was perfectly fine, walked to the hospital. Gigante fled, and Costello refused to, as a good mobster, refused to identify him at trial, and Gigante walked.
Okay. And then by 1981, the Chin became the boss of the family.
Yeah. Yes, because I'm thinking of Benny Squint Lombardo, who was the boss, and it was discreet during a period of time. So.
Okay. But then at one point, a war broke out. And by 86, he ordered the assassination of John Gotti, which actually didn't end up happening.
Yeah, so Gotti had killed Castellano in order to take over the Gambino crime family. That murder was a threat to all the other bosses, because if you can kill a boss and get away with it, what's going to keep Chin safe? What's going to keep the bosses of the other families safe? Chin was the boss of all the bosses, the head of the commission, which was an organization of all the crime families to try to maintain order. And so Chin led the effort to kill Gotti in retaliation for Gotti killing Castellano.
Okay. Well, and then at one point, John Gotti got arrested and got sent to prison. And then he basically became the top mafia guy in the country, right?
Well, Gigante remained the top mafia guy. Gotti went to jail, which is why Gigante never killed Gotti. Mike, in his massive investigation, the Genovese family, which is the biggest takedown, arguably, in law enforcement history of the mafia, Mike got a great recording, which you can address, about Gotti planning to kill Gigante.
Yeah, there's a bunch of things there with regard to Gotti and the intent to anticipate his own murder and retaliate. And he had basically, according to Alan, well, do I want to give names? Let me go back a sec.
Yeah, it's okay to mention Longo.
So we made recordings with Alan Longo, who was a messenger for the Genovese family. He interacted with other administration roles and capos. And in the conversation, he described his former capo, Ali Shades Malangone, as having conversations with John Gotti about murdering Chin. And Ali Shades was a Genovese capo. And that type of hypocrisy is one of the and again, Alan Longo openly spoke. Ali Shades was his capo, but he openly spoke about everybody in their crew hated him because of his ego.
So while you had Gigante convicted for trying to kill John Gotti, what the public doesn't know, but as we talk about in our book, War Against the Mafia, which is coming out in November, and what Mike alluded to is Gotti at the same time was planning to kill Gigante, and I don't think that's ever been publicly known before.
Oh, so John Gotti wanted to kill the Chin. Interesting.
Yeah, because he knew Gigante, he knew the Chin was trying to kill him. Gotti had his own plan to kill Gigante.
And according to this was, if that occurred and Ali Shades assisted, that Ali Shades would replace him as boss.
So there was a capo in the Genovese crime family, a powerful guy named Ali Shades Malangone. Had Gotti killed Gigante, Ali Shades Malangone was going to take over the Genovese.
Aha. Okay, so you touched on this before, Dan. So you actually saw Gigante walking around the streets of Manhattan with a bathrobe, with drool on his face and so forth. Now, he actually kept this up for 30 years?
Yeah, for 30 years plus. And it worked, as crazy as it sounds. Like, if you read this in a Batman comic book, you'd reject it as silly. It worked in real life. All the gangsters knew. They were all recorded on tape. You know, when there were recordings, they all said this is just a silly act. But it worked. He got psychiatrists to testify that he was crazy. He convinced judges to sever his cases and not go to trial because he was supposedly crazy. The whole thing was just a silly farce.
Right. He was called the Odd Father and the Enigma in the Bathrobe.
Yeah, it was no enigma to FBI agents like Mike or to prosecutors like myself. It was obvious to us that it was all a facade and a fraud. But he fooled a heck of a lot of psychiatrists who were very well credentialed. And again, in our book, War Against the Mafia, we go into it and we tell you what they said and how they testified for him and how ultimately Mike, through his creativity, and frankly, he's too humble to say this, but I'll give him credit for his brilliance. He was able to put together evidence that permitted me to prosecute the Chin and get him to come into court, in open court, and finally swear under oath that the whole thing was a fraud all along for 30, 40 years.
A prior investigation I conducted focused on the acting administration for the Genovese family with a strategy I thought would charge them with some crimes, and if they did a severe sentencing, life in prison for murders, that they may realize that they're the ones out in the street conducting the criminal conversation while the other person is hiding, pretending to be crazy, and that at that point it may compel cooperation, as a cooperating witness. Other people cooperate as informants, which is more discreet. But that strategy was to show the hypocrisy of the life, the insulation of the guy that's, living off those on the street.